Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 1 Episode 24. It is the season finale. It is called the Erlenmeyer Flask, so spoilers for the episode and indeed the whole season. Wasn't sure what to expect going into this. Like what a season finale of the X-Files would be. Like I really didn't know because of how, case of the week, freak of the week style the episodes are typically. Obviously, there's the occasional episode that's more about the overall mythology. I guess I expected that at the very least, that it would advance the core idea of the X-Files a little bit. And there's some big stuff that happens here. And the episode starts pretty action-packed, actually. The opening couple of shots of this episode are a car chase. Like, one of the first things you see is a car doing that thing where they're sort of like speeding over a hill, so it's sort of flying through the air for a couple of seconds. We start off with that, and the culprit that's being chased by the police gets shot and seemingly bleeds green, which means aliens, right? Obviously, we've all seen Predator. That makes sense to me. So it was what I thought. Turns out he's a hybrid, but we'll get into the ins and outs of what's going on here. It's an interesting episode because the first half of it is kind of a typical X-Files episode, albeit maybe a little more action-packed, where, Mulder and Scully are investigating a thing, Mulder's tipped off by Deep Throat, and they're looking into this thing. Mulder's not even aware that this thing's going on until Deep Throat gets involved, which is right at the start of the episode, to be fair, like right after the opening scene. I think after the opening titles, Deep Throat calls Mulder, but, it's not something that they're investigating naturally. He puts them onto it. And then after that, they're investigating a thing. Scully's skeptical, as per usual, and it's playing out as you'd expect. But it takes some bigger swings in the back half of the episode where Mulder ends up like kidnapped by an elite Black Ops style shady part of the government. And the mission then becomes Scully working with Deep Throat to save him. Wasn't expecting that. That was interesting. Obviously, Deep Throat himself is dead by the end of this episode, seemingly. It is the X-Files, so I don't know how, wacky they get about bringing characters back to life and things like that. I don't know, but it seems like Deep Throat might be just a season 1 thing based on his demise in this episode. It's interesting because one of the big things that I was thinking about during this episode is that we see this team of villains, effectively, like hunting down anyone who knows anything about the thing that's going on. And they kill a scientist who's working on a research project because he's gotten too far and knows too much. They later kill a doctor who Scully goes to analyze this material, this liquid that they find at the lab, the crime scene where the other doctor died. And she spends all night looking in at it. And this is actually some of the most fascinating stuff in the episode, I thought. And I'll go back and talk about it specifically. But this doctor, the next day, it turns out, has mysteriously died in a car accident with her whole family. And Scully looks terrified, of course, because clearly they've been killed to keep them quiet about what they know. And the question immediately erupting after these two deaths was, okay, well, she was talking to Scully about this all night. Scully knows all the things that she did pretty much, at least as far as we know. Maybe she found more stuff after the fact. Why aren't they just killing Scully too? Why isn't Mulder just being killed? They do kind of address this when Mulder gets kidnapped. Deep Throat says that they won't kill him because he's too high profile. I guess because he openly investigates this kind of thing, his death would not just be ignored or taken for granted. People would look into it. I'm not so sure I 100% believe that necessarily, but that's what they're going with, so we'll roll with it. But it was a question that kind of came up in my mind, is like, why aren't they just killing everyone, including Deep Throat? So I was almost relieved when they just killed Deep Throat at the end of the episode, when he makes the exchange to get Mulder back, because I thought it was strange that they wouldn't just kill everyone. If that's how shady they are, if people at the top don't even know this group exists that are covering these things up, why are they letting anyone live who's seen something or knows something? So the explanation is that Mulder and Scully are too high profile, is all we're getting right now, and maybe that's a bit of a weak excuse, just because they're the main characters of the show and we have to keep going. But yeah, it doesn't give me something really interesting to chew on as to why they're not being killed. It's just kind of like, well, they're the main characters, so we just kind of have to accept that they're not going to. It would be maybe a little more interesting if there was something more definitive that made them untouchable. I suppose the one thing that was untouchable about them before is that Deep Throat, we know, was using his own connections to make sure the X-Files division stayed open. And seemingly at the end of this episode, it's being shut down. Obviously, there's a lot more seasons of the show, so I'm expecting episode 1 of season 2 to clear that up somehow. But at least the little cliffhanger with Mulder at the end is that the X-Files division is going away. So, I'll see what they do with that in the next season. So, I did enjoy the episode. I think the stuff with the scientist lady looking into these bacteria, the baboon piss, at least that's what I thought it was, so I'm glad Scully made the same joke, because I thought it was piss as well. But she takes this piss from the lab to go get analysed at another lab. The FBI-approved lab. The scientist is looking into it, and eventually... And I thought they did a good job of explaining why this was strange. She set up, okay, all life on Earth is made up of these 4 basic building blocks, these gene sequences. This is stuff that most people aren't going to know. I certainly didn't know it, and I think they did a good job of explaining there's only 4 of these. In the entire planet, there's only 4. Everything's made up of these 4 things. This bacteria you've got me looking at has a 5th and 6th. It therefore, by definition, is... Well, she says extraterrestrial. I thought she was going to say alien. I thought extraterrestrial felt a bit too specific. I mean, I guess she is a scientist, but... The implication when they're talking about it is that it's possible they are from Earth, but they're just like so prehistoric. They predate even the dawn of humanity, and they're just really old. I guess it kind of ties into the ice episode, right? Is that the stuff that they found down in the ice is just so old that it predates all human existence. But, it's probably alien. It makes sense. It's not something from our sometimes they'll do this not with genes, but in other sci-fi shows or stories, they'll do, like, materials that aren't on the periodic table. It's like, oh, this is something that doesn't match anything else. This is a metal that comes from somewhere else. So, this is kind of like that, but with DNA, right? Dino DNA, but not Dino, because we're not doing Jurassic Park. So... I thought that was really cool. I thought that was like Scully being a doctor, someone with a med degree, someone who has been skeptical all season. I thought her being the one to be handed this scientific proof that there's something else that can't be explained in her hands was a really good capper for her story by the end of the season. It actually goes further than that. She actually gets to see something later in the episode. But even just her looking at this and being confronted that there's something in this bacteria, and I think I like it because it's not it's not a big alien, right? It's not some scary alien or monster or something spooky. I love that it's just as simple as this bacteria can't be from Earth. It's something else, because it's almost like by breaking it down to the most boring level in a weird way, it makes it more grounded and therefore exciting, because it feels like, okay, if we start off by saying this DNA is just alien, it means we can build to the bigger things that are more fantastical. Now, obviously, the show's already had the fantastical in it. I'm not saying it hasn't, but I'm saying for Scully's character arc and her believing these things are existing and whatnot, in a way I almost think maybe she shouldn't have seen the thing she sees later on in the episode, but I did enjoy that scene. To be fair, I did enjoy her seeing something overtly alien. Not so much because she... Like I say, I think this on its own for Scully was a really cool moment and made a lot of sense to me to be like a big thing she gets in the finale, is here's some scientific proof of something that isn't from Earth. But the moment later on when she goes into the fancy, I guess it's another lab. There's too many labs in this episode. The place that Deep Throat tells her to go to, which stores all this secret material. Deep Throat, of course, explains that the bacteria comes from an actual alien tissue sample, something they've had since the end of the 40s. They bring up Roswell. He says, Roswell's the big fancy like smokescreen, but there was like 12 other, or at least a dozen other more fruitful alien sites and ships and encounters or whatever. Scully's sent in to basically steal this alien sample. They're going to use that to negotiate Mulder's release, which is, yeah, okay, right, fair enough. Like, they know that if this alien thing gets on the news and enough people find out about it, there's no putting the worms back in the can, as it were. But when she goes to get it, she goes in and they do a whole thing. It's very tense. She has to guess a password to get in based on the stuff earlier in the episode. But she gets to this cryo chamber and pulls out. I was expecting like a hunk of flesh, right? It's a bit of flesh from an alien. Instead, it's like a baby alien. It's like a full baby alien with the little alien head. And she pulls it out and she's looking at it. Now, I think if it was just Scully on her own this episode, right, or just looking at her as a character on her own, I would say that she didn't really need to see something this fantastical. I think the scientific proof of the extra, building blocks that shouldn't exist was already a big enough deal for Scully as a character. I don't think she needed this. However, I do actually really like the irony almost that she gets to see this like outrageous visual proof of an alien before Mulder. I actually really like that. That was like what was going through my head when I got to this moment, is that I kind of like that Mulder's not getting to see this. For once, it's the other way around, and Scully's seeing an alien. She's looking at an alien. Like, undoubtedly, right? she's holding an alien in her hand. It's frozen. And Mulder isn't getting to see it. I thought that was just some wonderful kind of irony, that after all the skepticism she's had, like, she's seen this now. I thought that was just kind of cool. No pun intended, because of the liquid nitrogen they're in. But, if I was to complain about something in the finale, is that the final point that it makes, which is we go back to the smoking man, putting this flask back in the big evidence storeroom, the big, the Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse looking thing that we saw back at the start of the season. And the final reveal before the credits is where this room is, right? He comes out the door and the fire escape directions are on the door, and it's the Pentagon, right? So this room is inside the Pentagon. That fell a bit flat for me because, well, like, the whole show's been about how there's shady things from inside the government. So finding out this storeroom's in a government building didn't really, like, it wasn't anything new, really. Like, I know the Pentagon's a famous building, and it's like, okay, maybe that's a bit more, like, I don't know, spectacular, I guess. So, it's a bit more, a bit more fireworks going off, I suppose, is the idea. But it's like, it's not really fundamentally new information or tells us much more about this, other than it just goes up to the highest possible levels and whatnot. But again, we kind of already assumed that. Like, I feel like the whole show has been telling us that there's shady people in the government. The smoking man himself has been in the FBI buildings around various meetings, and then we've seen him putting evidence away. So it being him again, I know it kind of bookends the season. That's what they're going for. I get that. Like, they're making it feel like a bookended story of this first year of the show. I can respect that. I get it. But the actual reveal just doesn't feel like much of a reveal to me. So, I would critique that a little bit and say it's kind of underwhelming. But the actual threat of Mulder being held captive and maybe they won't get him back. Although the question is, though, is if they're not going to kill him, what will they do with him? Like, if he's too high profile to kill, surely he's still also too high profile to just be missing forever? Like, if they throw him in like a jail cell somewhere and never let him out, is that any real different than... I guess maybe they can be more convincing that he just ran away or something. Maybe it's easier to fake the reasons for it than the fake death. Because we know they make it look like suicide or accidents. The scientist lady in the middle of the episode, she's in a supposed car accident. The doctor scientist man who was doing the experiments with the bacteria and the baboons, he was made to look like a suicide, like he'd hanged himself out the window. And we know this isn't true, of course. One of the details that I'm just thinking about now, actually, is so the fugitive at the start of the episode that was being chased by the police in the big car chase, he jumps in the water. Part of the backstory, or the background story, I should say, for this first half of the episode is that the local police are looking for him in the water. But once we get halfway through the episode and Mulder finds this like storage area filled with like 6 or 7 people who are sleeping underwater but breathing. We find out that these people, and the fugitive is one of these people, are people who were dying of terminal illnesses of varying kinds, who volunteered for this experimental genome therapy with the alien bacteria. How much they knew about what they were being given is probably, up for debate. Probably not a whole lot. But this mutated them, and it cured all their diseases and let them breathe underwater. But also their blood, or whatever's inside them, is toxic, and we see that affecting some people in the episode. The ambulance paramedics start coughing and having a reaction when they're working on this guy in the ambulance. Mulder, when he breathes in some of the guy's blood, when he finds him later in the episode, he's having a reaction to it. So that's something they establish throughout the episode. I do think it's interesting to establish that their blood is now toxic to other humans, and just by breathing it in, right? Not instant death by any means. I mean, Mulder's clearly fine by the end of the episode, but he has a reaction to it. I think that's an interesting little tidbit. I wonder if they'll come back to this in some way, where they'll tease something because we'll maybe get a green substance again, we'll see some similar reactions to something before they reveal that it's a hybrid. I'm not sure, but I feel like this is something that could be brought up again. It feels like a rule that we can return to. But yeah, people breathing underwater is pretty nifty. But that turns out that's how the guy was hiding so successfully, is that he was just hiding underwater, breathing as happy as he can be. He was still pretty injured when he came out, though, which is why he ends up in an ambulance, and he ends up hiding in the attic of the doctor. Because this guy was a little different to the other patients who got the treatment, in that he personally knew the scientist who was doing the research. So that was like the scientist like helping out his friend who was dying and like giving him this experimental treatment. And it worked, but and one of the things that makes this episode feel like a big deal as well is that Deep Throat comes out when Scully's there as well. Like he shows up after all these tanks have disappeared, which is it's one of those very predictable things that you can kind of see coming. Like Mulder's like, hey Scully, I found all these tanks with people, I'm going to show you it. And of course, before he even opens the door, they're not going to be there. And then Scully says, I'm going to go and get this evidence from the lab that the woman told me about. And of course, she's not going to get it. It's going to be gone mysteriously. Those elements are a little... I mean, they're obviously predictable, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that they're a little annoying. They're a little annoying, because you already know they're not going to get what they're saying they're going to get in the next scene. And I do find that a little bit frustrating, because it's just like, yeah, of course, they've came and covered it up. We know they do this. It's kind of like a recurring thing. But Deep Throat shows up and talks to both of them, and it feels like a big deal that he's just openly doing this in front of Scully now. He says, hello, we met briefly, and then just starts talking in front of them. And it was exciting because Scully's been very skeptical. I mean, I know I say that a lot about Scully, but she's specifically been questioning Deep Throat, right? The last time we had a big Deep Throat episode, she was questioning who he was, what his motivations are. And she does it again in this episode early on, accuses him of just playing with Mulder. She has actually quite a good one-liner at the end of a scene where Mulder and Scully, because early on they don't really know what they're looking for, and she thinks it's a wild goose chase. And Mulder's like, what, you think he's just doing this? He's just feeding me this information because he gets off on it? And Scully says, no, I think he feeds it to you because you get off on it, and walks out. And that actually felt like a good burn. Deep Throat shows up again, but what was really exciting is that when he shows up, the final, well, not the final time, but the time he shows up with Scully being there and just openly talks in front of her, is that Scully, doesn't suddenly go quiet. She does start questioning things directly to him, things that Mulder would have maybe never said. Although clearly she does have an effect on Mulder's state, because when Deep Throat shows up the second time, Mulder does sort of put up more of a fight and says, you're not giving me anything, why are you doing this? He questions things in a way because Scully's hit a nerve that maybe he's realized, or maybe she's right. Obviously, as the episode goes on, it turns out, no, there was something here to investigate. Like, she was wrong in a sense, but I do really appreciate that when she got the chance to directly interact with Deep Throat, she kind of started hitting at the questions that you'd expect her to ask. Of course, he has an answer for everything and explains that, there's evidence out there and that those two are the only ones that can bring light to all this, which if that's what he's fine, if that's what his ultimate goal is, if that's what he really wants, then maybe he's genuinely helping. Of course, we're now in a position where Deep Throat is dead. Deep Throat insists that he make the exchange of the alien baby that Scully stole. She wants to do it, but he insists on doing it himself. And arguably, he maybe insists because he expects that whoever makes the exchange will get killed. And sure enough, they just shoot him. Like, after he hands it over, they shoot him and they dump Mulder out the back of their van. And yeah, part of me still questions, like, why even honor the deal? Why even give Mulder back? But I suppose if they do think he's too high profile to kill, then what I said is also true about him being too high profile to just be missing forever. Meaning that Deep Throat was almost a fool for even thinking they had to do anything. Eventually, if they don't want any questions about where Mulder is or where he's going, then they'd probably hand them over at some point anyway. The episode didn't really give me enough to really get a good sense of what their thought process with what they're doing to Mulder is necessarily. There is that one moment where they've got him tied up and the one mysterious guy on the Black Ops team is speaking very ominously about not liking talking about... Not that he doesn't like talking on phones because he's always wary of wiretaps and things like that. But it's all very menacing because Mulder's tied up and he's got like swollen eyes from breathing in the alien toxin, because it wasn't black eyes. It wasn't like he'd been... I mean, maybe he's been hit as well, but it looked more like an allergic style reaction of some kind. But it's not actually an allergy, of course. So honestly, it's a pretty solid episode. It does do some things that feel like culminations of the season, particularly Deep Throat. It feels like a bow's kind of tied with that character without giving us too much answers about who he was, but I wasn't really expecting much in that way. But even the fact that Scully gets to directly interact with them, and I think the biggest thing that, you know, I've said repeatedly throughout the show that the heart of the show really is the camaraderie between Scully and Mulder. So the idea that one of them's in danger again in the finale and the other has to really put their neck out to save them because they really care about saving their partner, that's really where the heart of the episode should be. So even if all the mythology stuff isn't necessarily ticking every box that you want it to, you should hopefully be emotionally invested in what the character's predicament is and that the other person really cares about them. And I think for the most part the episode handles that fairly well. It's not my favourite of the season, and I do think that next episode I won't be reviewing the start of season 2 next time. I think next time I'll probably do what we do with Star Trek, and I'll do a top 5 episodes of the season. I think with this show, because it is so case of the week, I think it's a very good idea to sort of just, you know, look back at the end of each season and pick out some favourites and see where they sit. I'm not sure where this one will land for me. I'll have a week to think about it before I make that video. But I think it's mostly really good stuff. I think there's some underlying little critiques that I've made, even right at the start of the show, about some of the conspiracy stuff where there keeps being cover-ups being a little like, okay, I get the point now. Like, I hadn't felt that in a while. I feel like all the standalone episodes had kind of mostly done a good job of just feeling separated from that. But because this episode brings it back into that sphere and we're more directly again talking about secret parts of the government covering things up, I don't think that I'm ever going to be completely in love with that unless they change how they handle it. So I'm not sure, you know, if that'll change. Maybe that'll just always be one of the weaker elements of the show to me. But, you know, it is what it is. But for the most part, I still quite enjoyed the finale. I think I had a lot of good stuff in there. Like I say, there's culminations for other things beyond just that stuff. So, yeah, we'll see where it goes. So that's my thoughts on the X-Files season finale. Like I said, next time I'll do a top 5 episodes of the season, and probably like a worst episode or maybe a bottom 3 or something like that. I usually do that with the Star Trek episodes when I'm doing the top 5s with Connor. So you get that next time, and then we'll be back to start season 2 after that. So let me know what you thought of the season finale in the comments, and indeed season 1 as a whole, now that the season's wrapped up. No harm in talking about the whole season now. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support all the content by going to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting financially over there. Or if you want to just help by clicking the like button, that does help a bunch. More people will find the show and the channel. So hit the button. It's easy. It's free. You just click. Easy peasy. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?